Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. On Fridays, we talk about the product owner role in Scrum. We talk about patterns and anti-patterns that relate to ours and the team's collaboration with the product owner. And we've also put together a course to help you navigate that relationship. There's 18 modules, nearly 8 hours of tools, techniques, videos, handouts, presentations you can use to help you and your team work better with your product owner. The course is available at bit.ly/coachyourPO. All lowercase, all one word. That's bit.ly/coachyourPO. And now, on to the show, the Product Owner Show. Hello everybody, welcome to our Friday TGIF and Product Owner episode this week with Joe Auslander. Hi Joe.
Hi Vasco.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
So Joe, on Fridays we talk Product Owner because of course it is one of the critical roles in the whole Scrum framework and for us as Scrum Masters, also one of the critical partnerships we need to develop. So let's start with what might have been potentially the worst product owner anti-pattern you've witnessed in your career, Joe.
Oh, the worst. I mean, it's really easy. The worst is the one that probably has a day job. As New Zealand, quite often change happens in an organization and people are labeled a product owner while still having all the responsibilities of whatever they did before. And so they refer to those previous responsibilities as their day job. And that's already always a red flag for me because it says that I have to do this extra thing and it's not a priority. And so these really talented overworked people, not supported people, end up only able to spend like 10%, 20% of their time as they bounce between. They might have direct reports outside of the team. They might have other other projects that they're working on and have their fingers in other pies. And then they have this other team, whatever they are, and they delegate the creation of the backlog to the BA and they review it maybe for an hour a week. They don't go to planning. They let the BA run the planning and they're not available for questions. They go to the review and they have the team sort of basically report to them on what they've delivered. They give feedback and they look at the BA really stern and then they disappear again. I don't want to call them a bad product owner because they're not bad people, and they're not really put into a very good situation. But it really keeps a team from coming together, especially because the BA is doing a lot of the work without having the authority to make decisions, and so that really, really slows down any meaningful progress on behalf of the team.
Yeah, absolutely. Some people would call this the seagull product owner, right? Comes in, steals your ice cream, and goes away.
I wish there was ice cream.
As Scrum Masters, obviously, we do need to be aware and ready to work with these people. They might even be, CTOs or directors of some department and have, loads of stuff to worry about. Maybe they're working 12 hours a day. We don't know what's behind it, but
that's right.
We still need to work with them. So what are your tips? What have you learned in about how to cope with this situation while helping the team and the product owner?
Yeah. So my go-to for anything that is hurting or not working, my go-to is transparency. Let's make it transparent what's happening and how we're wasting money and wasting time and how it's affecting the morale. The thing is, though, that level of transparency, depending on the organization you're in, can actually hurt some people's careers. So first thing I do is I go to the Scrum Master. By the way, most people, sorry, not the Scrum Master, the product owner. And most product owners in this role did not place themselves in that role. So they are victims of someone else's decision. And normally they say yes, because in the organization you say yes when someone of power or influence offers you something, but this was not their brainchild. And so I go to them and I say, look, you're being pulled in multiple directions. Would you be interested in spending more time with the team? Yes or no? that either answer is fine. I would show them what's happening, and they would say, yeah, I can see that too, but there's nothing I can do. And then I would say, well, I would like to use the review, and I'd like to invite some of our senior stakeholders into the review, and I'd like to make this apparent. And I don't want to make this your fault, but you're part of this scenario. How can I talk about this in a way that you're comfortable with, and how can I prep them so that it's safe for you? And surprisingly, more often than not, people are quite keen to work with me because either they want to be all in, or they and let go of the previous responsibilities, or they want all out and they want to go back to their previous responsibilities because it's just as painful for them. So if I have that agreement, if I can come to that agreement with them, which I've never not, we start to invite the stakeholder in. And we start to, and I would maybe start talking to them about it before and prep them for it so it's not a surprise to them as well. And the team would talk about their experience, and we would try to visualize how this is changing their ability to make decisions quickly and get things out the door, how things might be bleeding over from sprint to sprint. And normally after a few sprints, if they really want this thing, they either suggest that more decision making is delegated to the BA. And we'll run that as an experiment to see how it goes. And I've seen it go really well. Or they work with the manager of whoever that product owner is to make sure that they have more time. And I've seen that go really well. Or they pull in someone who has more time or has more experience in it. And that goes really well. So my go-to with any problem is sort of compassionate transparency.
Yeah, compassionate transparency, and then working together, right? Okay, so do you want to be in or out? Because we can work for either outcome.
Yeah. You really got to avoid reacting to negative situations as if someone has it out for you, because it's a pretty powerful position being a Scrum Master and being able to bring transparency to a situation. But that's just data. Without a story and context to go with that data, it can be interpreted in ways that really hurt people when they don't deserve it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's always that possibility that we should be aware of.
Yeah, totally.
That was a great story, great tip as well. So, Joe, now we talk about the opposite, the mirror image, what might have been potentially the best product owner you've ever worked with. How did that look like?
Oh, that's easy. She stands out in my mind. Her name was Louise. She's amazing. Up until my point of working with her, I had always had to sort of train and work with Scrum Masters to get them up to, not Scrum Masters, product owners to get them up to speed. And she was my first product owner who had more experience than me in working in this way. And it was a delight.
And what did that look like, though? Because, of course, when I hear you say, I had to train and support POs to get them up to speed, I'm imagining, the simplest thing. They really don't get what the PO role is. They don't know what grooming means. They don't schedule the grooming meetings. They don't write stories. They're used to dictate stuff that somebody else writes. I can imagine that, but what do you mean?
Yeah. So in the past, it was training product owners on how to interact with the team. And actually, what's really interesting is Scrum doesn't teach you how to be a product owner. Scrum gives you a way to help product owners work with the Scrum team. There's a very deep amount of knowledge and practice in being a product owner, and you can dig into that all day long. And we're not going to go into great detail on that, but there's a lot of research. There's a lot of ways of learning from customers. There's a lot of strategy that comes into building a backlog. There's a lot of ways of using the backlog to interact with the team that Scrum doesn't directly teach you. And it's not necessarily product ownership is not a Scrum thing. It's a thing unto itself. And then it works really well in Scrum in these environments. And so she had come from this really deep product ownership background. And basically what she did is as soon as she came in, she said, what behaviors are you working on with the team? These are the behaviors that I need from the team. How do we work together in helping to develop them and be transparent about what we're doing? And I'm like, wow, I've never had a product owner say that before. And so I started quizzing her on what she does, how she plans out her backlog, how she does roadmaps, what her strategy is. And she had this huge UX and design interview process that was completely new to me. And it was beautiful. She'd get the team involved. One of the things that I remember that she did that I thought was really, really cool is she would intentionally leave her user stories vague. And she'd do this to stimulate conversation in the refinement, to get them to ask a lot of questions and immediately create a negotiating conversation. So she'd just sort of say, oh, I want them to have this experience. I think it's valuable like this. And it would be like, and she'd have some really kind of vaguish acceptance criteria, like they need to be able to push a button and do this. And they're like, how does that relate to that experience and that value? And she's like, I don't know. And she would play this kind of like role to get them really, really interested in it. And of course they were. And they would have these really deep, rich conversations as they developed out these user stories, and they'd split them up and they would get them into these really beautiful units of value that could then be delivered. And I'd never seen that done before. And I've always taken that away and thought it was just masterful.
Yeah, that's a great point, because very often we talk about product owners as learning how to write stories well. I just had a conversation this week with a team that wanted their product owner to write better stories. And you just gave us an example into as to how worse stories can actually create better conversations if people are willing to have them in the first place.
Yeah, that's right. There should be an episode on how to write bad user stories productively.
That is a great idea. Maybe we do it together, Joe.
Sounds good.
And for me, that's important, because looking back at the origin of the whole concept of user stories, there's the 3C idea. So card, so physical token, conversation, so talking about it. It's there to remind us that we need to talk about it. And then confirmation. What does it mean to be done with this, right? Yeah. Acceptance criteria is one of the techniques we use for that. But very often we have the card. It's in some, issue tracking tool somewhere. We are supposed to have the conversation, but we probably skip over it and instead have a very long discussion about the size of the story. And then we have the confirmation, which of course would be a natural outcome of a productive and detailed conversation about the card. But we end up delegating that into either the product owner, or even worse, just have the tester write the acceptance criteria. And then we forget that the whole idea of user stories was exactly to not delegate, to do it together, to create that unit of value, as you called it, as a team rather than independently.
Yeah, exactly. And when I asked her why she did this, I was like, are you just being lazy? And she goes, no, not at all. She's like, it's actually harder to not write everything in my head down because I've done so much research up until this point. I have a good idea of what it should be. She did it because the team consistently, maybe not every user story, maybe not every sprint, but certainly often would surprise her if she left it open. And those surprises, more often than not, were more valuable than what she could have come up with. So she really used the collective brain power of the team. And I really enjoyed learning that with her.
That is also a brilliant wrap-up, because it is true that the team can bring in innovation that is far beyond what the PO could come up with, because they have the deep insight into what the technology can and cannot do.
That's right.
That was a great story, Joe. It's been a pleasure to have you here this week. Unfortunately, we're getting close to the end, but before we do go, where can people find out more about you and the work that you're doing?
Well, LinkedIn is a good place to start. I've got a profile in there, and I also co-host a podcast called Joekub, Joekub. It's a podcast about life, agile, and monkeys. Monkeys being random topics that we like to go out on and sort of play around with.
Absolutely. And so I've been on the podcast as well. I'll put the link on the show notes so that people can find Joe and Joekub's podcast and listen to it for sure. So, Joe, it's been a pleasure. Thank you once again for your generosity with your time and your knowledge.
Vasco, this has been a trip. Thanks.
One more week of the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast is over, but there's a lot more we have to share. We have developed our own membership site where you find a community of active and engaged Scrum Masters. In this site, you get access to exclusive content and get to interact with us, your podcast hosts, as well as the best Scrum Masters in the world. Join us at scrummastertoolbox.com/podcast and keep this podcast free of advertising. See you next week for one more week full of Scrum Master tips and tricks. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.